So with 2020 being full of disappointing hardware releases, the RTX 3000 series and the RX 6000 series essentially running out of stock instantly, Zen 3 CPUs available almost nowhere except for on eBay for scalped prices, and Intel has yet to come out with anything that's actually worth buying yet. Still though, there are lots of things to look out for in 2021 for hardware releases from Intel, AMD, Nvidia, and more. We'll start with Intel. Intel doesn't currently have a lot to compete with AMD on the CPU side, but Intel is set to release Rocket Lake in Q1 2021, and it's supposed to have a nice boost over previous gen Comet Lake chips. In Cinebench R15 with all cores locked to 4 GHz, the 11900K outperforms the previous generation 10700K by about 13%, but still loses out to the Ryzen 7 5800X by 8%. Not to mention that Intel has actually reverted its core count, so top-end i9 chips are now 8-core 16-thread instead of the 10-core 20-thread that we saw from Comet Lake. Rocket Lake will still be on LGA 1200, so existing Comet Lake users do not have to upgrade their motherboard in order to use these CPUs. This time though, Intel isn't using their traditional Skylake 14nm cores, but instead is using a 14nm backported Golden Cove core. Alder Lake is going to be Intel's first 10nm desktop mainstream chip. That is right, we're moving off of 14nm finally if everything goes as planned, and we're actually going to see 10nm desktop chips. This is also the first time that we're seeing Intel's implementation of Big Little on their mainstream desktop chips, where high power cores are combined with low power cores on the same CPU chip. The high power cores will be on 10nm Golden Cove cores, and the low power cores will be on 10nm Grace Mount cores. A while back I actually reported on this topic, and I stated that I thought that Alder Lake was going to be a huge winner. I still think that Alder Lake is going to be good, but since Golden Cove is based off of Sunny Cove, and we saw terrible performance with Sunny Cove on Intel's Ice Lake mobile chips, I'm not as sure if they're going to be able to do as well and bring back their competition against AMD. Intel is really going to have to step it up and make some major improvements to these CPUs. Alder Lake will be on LGA 1700, and will also be the first time that Intel will put PCIe 5.0 support and DDR5 support on these CPUs. It's set to release sometime in 2021, so hopefully Intel can stay on that roadmap. Moving on to AMD, we'll begin to see Ryzen 5000 mobile APUs sometime in 2021, but the 5300U, 5500U, and the 5700U are all Zen 2 based, while all other SKUs are going to be Zen 3 based. So when buying a laptop, if you want a Zen 3 APU, then make sure that you buy a CPU with an even number in the name. So for example, the 5400U, the 5600U, and the 5800U are all going to be Zen 3 based, while the 5300U, 5500U, and the 5700U are all Zen 2 based. AMD is also on track to release their Zen 4 CPUs for desktop sometime in 2021, which will have DDR5 and PCIe 5.0 support, not to mention that is also out of 5nm TSMC process. I reported on this a while back, but other speculative details include a 40% IPC increase over Zen 3, a much improved 7nm Infinity fabric, and the potential for 4 CCDs on a single CPU. If you'd like to see that video, I will link it in the description below. After practically no RTX 3000 series stock, Nvidia is planning to release a couple more RTX 3000 series cards. Among these cards includes the 3060 Ti, which is set to release in January, the 3070 Ti and the 3080 Ti, which will release sometime in 2021, and the 3060, 3050 Ti, and the 3050, which will also release sometime in 2021. The 3060 is supposed to have similar performance to an RTX 2080, and according to a leaked Gigabyte page, it's supposed to have 8GB of VRAM. However, Lenovo has also released some other products showing that it has 12GB of VRAM, so we'll see which one it actually is. The RTX 3050 has 6GB of VRAM, and the RTX 3050 has 4GB of VRAM. The launch of DDR5 is on the rise, considering that both AMD and Intel are prepping their next generation CPUs to handle DDR5, which should come sometime in 2021 or 2022. JEDEC standards could indicate a huge increase in performance over DDR4. Maximum die density has increased from 16 gigabits to 64 gigabits. The maximum UDIMM size has quadrupled from 32 gigabytes to 128 gigabytes, and lower voltage requirements at 1.1 volts versus DDR4's 1.2 volts. Micron has demoed DDR5 4400, SK Hynix has samples of DDR5 5200 ready, and many companies are ramping up production in preparation for the release of these next generation CPUs. Lastly, Apple is coming out with a lot of new stuff, most notably their M2 chips that are slated to release probably sometime this year. Apple's M1 chips are a serious competitor to Intel and AMD chips in terms of performance, and they far outclass Intel and AMD in terms of power consumption and thermal requirements. If M2 chips can scale up higher than 8 or 16 cores, then we could see a very powerful Mac Pro on our hands that doesn't require much to cool at all. Apple is also planning to release an iMac Pro, which is supposed to have a similar aesthetic to the iPad Pro. AirPods Generation 3 are going to be released sometime this year as well, with a similar style to the AirPods Pro with the silicone tips. 14.1 and 16.1 inch MacBook Pros are also on the way, with reported mini LED displays also coming as well. Well, that's a lot of hardware that's coming out this year, and hopefully we can actually see some stock so that people can get their hands on these parts and use them in builds.